After rejecting the Liberals outright, voters in Alberta and Saskatchewan will have no representatives from the ruling party in this new government. With more on what that could mean for the two provinces, we're joined this morning by John Sorosky. He's a political science professor at McEwen University in Edmonton. Thanks for joining us today.
Good, glad to be here.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe sent a letter to Justin Trudeau yesterday asking for immediate action on these three things: cancel the carbon tax, make equalization payments to provinces fairer for Saskatchewan and Alberta, and get pipelines built. How do the election results we're living with today change the likelihood of energy projects and policies like these moving forward?
Well, I think there's a real sense in Alberta and Saskatchewan that you know the few successes that we've had in terms of moving pipelines forward are potentially in jeopardy as a result of the government change. And as you know, I mean, the one pipeline that has successfully moved forward, or at least partly successfully moved forward, has been the Trans Mountain pipeline. The Trudeau government has indicated a commitment to proceed with that, but given that it's now in a minority situation, there are some people who are scratching their heads and wondering if that's really going to go forward. So there's some concern about that.
I grew up in Alberta in the 70s and the 80s. Western alienation was a real thing then. It was echoed yesterday by Andrew Scheer. When we were out in the prairies for your morning, we heard those phrases again. They feel like the Liberals have forgotten about them. Are these results going to make this, how do they move forward from here? They do make it worse.
Yeah, I mean, I've been around since the 80s, so I remember those days when the sense of alienation was high. This, to me, does seem like, in a sense, a repeat of those perceptions. So, I mean, I think there's a number of issues, and I think Scott Moe laid them out. So there's discontent with the carbon tax here. There's also, considerable concern about the idea of pipeline access to offshore markets. And so, to my mind, I think that this kind of flirtation with separatism has been motivated by a perception that the Trudeau government has really not been fair to Alberta and Saskatchewan. And I think probably the main thing that would reduce that sense of discontent would be the successful completion of the Trans Mountain pipeline, which, as you know, is now under appeal again for the second time. So again, I think that's the core issue out here.
Justin Trudeau is going to be speaking a little bit later this week, but how does he go about repairing this? I mean, this is anger that goes back to when his father was the prime minister, right? People are building on top of that. So how do you move forward? How do you get pipelines in Alberta when you have to work with the NDP and the Bloc who've said no?
Yeah, I like to tell students occasionally from my research, I accompany door-to-door campaigners in Alberta. And I remember even a few years ago, you'd go to the door, people were still angry at Pierre Trudeau and the national energy policy here in Alberta. And you're seeing those kinds of sources of discontent growing here as well. I think one of the difficulties with the Justin Trudeau government, from the perception of those who are discontented, is the idea that, he's saying one thing and doing another. So, the national government has indeed purchased the Trans Mountain pipeline to push it forward. But, in a kind of a complicated development, that process of approval has been recently appealed to the Federal Court of Appeal. And it's been noted that Justice Minister David Lametti did not provide a counter to that request for an appeal. So essentially, that means the Trans Mountain pipeline is up for legal consideration again, because the federal government decided to sit on the sidelines instead of defending its own decision. And so, those are the kinds of things that are perceived in, I think, both Alberta and Saskatchewan as the federal government, enthusiastically saying one thing, but not really following through on it. I think that's the kind of thing that's causing contemporary discontent.
So we're sitting in this mode of anger right now, but we do have to move forward as a government, at least for the next, 2 to 4 years. So how does the Prime Minister do that? How do you take the fact that you've been cut out of the West, but bring them into the fold and do what he said on election night, which is govern for everybody?
Yeah, and I mean, he in fact did in his speech on election night indicate that he at least expressed concern about the circumstances of Alberta and Saskatchewan. So the Prime Minister has rhetorically indicated an interest in responding to those interests. I was quite interested. I watched Premier Jason Kenney of Alberta yesterday provide a speech in response to those outcomes. Obviously, he was somebody who was quite opposed to the idea of a second round for the Trudeau government. He sounded quite conciliatory to me, alongside with the expression of discontent. And so I think the idea is, if you can find a way to work with Premier Kenney, that may be a way to, appease some discontent. Other issues are not really that readily resolvable. I don't think the Trudeau government is prepared to move back on the carbon tax. So we're likely to see that as a matter of continuing conflict. So again, I think we're left with a perception in Alberta and Saskatchewan that the one thing that would really be responsive here is the success of the Trans Mountain pipeline.
All right. Thanks so much, John Sorosky, joining us from Edmonton this morning.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
Thanks for watching. If you like this, be sure to subscribe here.
And you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.